The new Z28 Camaro is unlike any muscle car you've ever seen before. It has brakes that you'd expect to see on a European supercar. It shares its engine with the old Z06 Corvette. And it's got suspension components that it shares in common with the Aston Martin 177. In fact, I'm convinced that this car is the coolest one to hit showrooms in all of 2014. When Chevrolet first showed this car about a year and a half ago at the New York Auto Show, they were very plain about the fact that it's probably a little bit too hardcore for most owners to want to daily drive. It costs about $75,000, and for that price, you get a pre-prepped track weapon. Under the hood, you've got a 7-liter naturally aspirated LS7 V8 that makes 505 horsepower and 481 pound-feet of torque. The only transmission available is a Tremec TR6060 6-speed manual. You also get massive carbon ceramic brakes and a suspension from Multimatic, a company in Ontario, Canada that you would normally find supplying Formula One race cars. In total, Chevrolet says there are 190 parts unique to the Z28 Camaro with one goal in mind: being fast as stink around a racetrack. Now, I can't emphasize this enough, the Z28 is a hardcore track special. Chevrolet threw almost everything possible out in the name of saving weight. In fact, this car weighs just over 3,800 pounds despite the massive engine and all of the componentry that went into making it so fast around a track. For example, the windows are thinner, the floor mats are gone, there's only one speaker, and air conditioning is optional. Everything in this car says track machine in much the same way that you would expect in something like, for example, the Porsche 911 GT3. The aerodynamic enhancements that you see on the car are more than cosmetic. In fact, they're functional, and Chevrolet says that they'll generate up to 150 pounds of downforce. Other items special to the Z28 that you can see from the outside include those carbon ceramic brakes that I mentioned earlier, and also specially made wheels from Alcoa, which, by the way, have a 305 width rating all the way around on the front and the rear. Those wheels come wrapped standard in Pirelli Trofeo R tires that will help the Camaro to pull more than a G in the corners. But most of what makes the Z28 so special is invisible from the curb. And after all, we're at Gingerman in southern Michigan, so let's get on the track and drive. All right, now I know what you're thinking. $75,000 for a Camaro that doesn't even make more power than a ZL1 or the Shelby GT500? They've got to be nuts, right? But this isn't like any other Camaro I've ever driven. In fact, this car is absolutely incredible. I mean, just the cornering grip you get alone is stunning. Not to mention the carbon ceramic brakes that stop this car despite the fact that it weighs more than 3,800 pounds. I mean, you can wait until later in a braking zone than any rational person ever should, and you still stop. It's miraculous. Which brings me to one of my next points. When Chevrolet was developing this car, they ended up going to Alcoa, the wheel supplier, and asking them to media blast the wheels. And what that means is that they actually gave an abrasive edge to the inner part of the rim where the rubber sits. And the reason for that is that these Pirelli Trofeo Rs offer so much grip on the ground that they were actually spinning on the rims as the car was braking while it was being tested on the track. I mean, pulling through a turn right now is just remarkable. This car is practically telepathic. You just point the nose where you want to go and the whole thing just goes with you. And a lot of that has to do with the suspension and the tires. It is worth mentioning, though, that these things aren't cheap and you're going to go through rubber pretty quickly. In fact, each one costs about $500, so you can expect to spend $2,000 each time you replace the tires. And if you're doing any sort of heavy driving, that will happen pretty frequently. Still, it's easy to forget about because, honestly, the throttle response is just incredible. I mean, that 7-liter LS7 is just a gem. It's amazing. give it a little bit of poke with your toe and you get a little bit of gas. Really lay it down and my God, it just takes off. It's addictive. And I think honestly one of the things that makes this car as fun to drive and as addictive as it is the fact that you still get a manual transmission to play around with. And you know, really the only other hardcore track special car that's coming from a factory these days is arguably the 911 GT3. And for the 991 generation, they're moving to a PDK. So in a lot of ways, I kind of see this as a value bargain. I mean, think about it for a second. It costs about 75 grand, which is half the cost of a GT3. And I won't say that it's going to outperform that car, but the fact of the matter is this thing is just so much fun to drive. And when you think about it that way, it makes a lot of sense. The Z28 Camaro is big. It's heavy, even with all of the lightweighting that Chevrolet did, and it'll go through tires and gas like a frat party on kegs. But none of that matters because it turns everything you thought you knew about muscle cars right upside down. You know, I don't say this very often, but if you have the money, buy this thing and buy it now.